Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Moniece Hour. I'm your host, Moniece, a queer mom, an artist, and someone navigating life while working full time in tech. This is a space where we keep it real, share stories, and find inspiration together. So if you're here for honest talk, motivation, and a bit of company on this journey that we call life, then you're in the right place. So let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome and how it affects us in our daily life. So, from being a parent to work to just relationships, friendships, all of the things, we are going to get into how to deal with imposter syndrome, how to get over it, so that we can be the very best version of ourselves. So, let's get into it. So, for those of you that are listening to this and you're like, what is imposter syndrome? I got you. I pulled up the Webster Dictionary definition of it, and I'm going to share it with you. So, imposter syndrome is a psychological condition that is characterized by persistent doubt concerning one's ability or accomplishments, accompanied by the fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of one's ongoing success. I am going to break that down for you in layman's terms so that you can understand what that is. So, imposter syndrome is basically you having all of the skill set, you've done the work, all of the things, but you still have doubt about if you're doing well, if you can achieve something, even though there's evidence there that shows that you have what it takes to do whatever it is that you want to do. So, for instance, I struggle with imposter syndrome at my job, and I experienced it a lot in the very beginning of me working there. And for those of you that don't know, I am a database support engineer. If this is your first episode you're listening to from me, and it's in tech, in the tech industry. And so when I first started, I remember talking with my manager, and I was just telling him how I don't feel like I'm doing well. I don't feel like I'm doing as well as my other team members. And he would always compliment me, especially when we would do our one-on-ones. He would tell me, you're doing so great. Keep up the good work. I'm so proud of you. You are doing things that people in your tenure aren't even doing yet. And I'm just so proud of you. I'm so happy we hired you. And he said that a lot. And I remember thinking in my head, like, what is he talking about? I'm barely doing anything. I barely know anything. I'm trying my best, but I'm not shooting for the stars. I'm not a wizard. I'm not a genius on this. That's how I felt anyway. But I remember him telling me, and this is advice that I'm going to give you guys because it was very, very great advice. So when you start doubting yourself, no matter where you are in the workplace, professionally, personally, whatever, I want you to do this. This was great advice. Shout out to my manager. Make a Google document or use a notepad or Word, whatever you got, even if you want to write this down. Basically, you're going to write down the date and time when someone compliments your work and your work ethic. Whenever you feel like you're not good enough or you're not doing enough, refer back to those notes to remind yourself about how amazing you're doing. Now, that is solid advice. And I started to write down some of the compliments that I was getting in the beginning. I haven't done it recently, but it really did help to remind me that, no, you're doing great. So sometimes we need that reminder. Sometimes we need that push, especially in the workplace. And for me, at my company, I don't think I'm the only minority. I'm not. However, I am the only Black woman and Black person that works there. I haven't seen anybody, and it's a smaller company. So I experienced that imposter syndrome so badly because I'm surrounded by other people that don't look like me, and I constantly just want to make sure that I'm doing my best and that no one's looking down on me. So I did go into my work experience already, but I wanted to kind of break down different areas where you might experience imposter syndrome because it's not always at work or in a professional setting. If you are a parent like me, you might experience that as a parent. I'm even going to talk to you about starting this podcast and how I felt it. And also just back to the workplace when you are working in a more male-dominated space, right? Let's talk about imposter syndrome and parenthood, because that is a real thing. I am a single mother. For those of you that don't know, my daughter's other parent passed away in 2020. So I am a single mom and I live in a different state away from family. So I'm really doing everything by myself. I have moments as a mother where I feel like I'm not doing enough. I feel like I'm not a good mom. I feel like I'm not a good parent. And there's evidence to show that I am, right? And how my kid is growing up, how she's being raised, how smart she is, how intelligent she is, how she listens, how she, maneuvers this world with things and little gems that I've dropped for her. I can kind of see that. But there are moments where I feel like I'm not doing my best job as a parent, where I feel like, oh my gosh, like I've been so focused on myself today. Did I give her enough of my time? And just all in my head. Also have to remind myself that even in parenthood, sometimes you don't have 100% to give that day, and that doesn't make you a bad parent. Sometimes you only have 40% or 50% or even 10%, depending on where you're at, your mental health. Have you even taken time for yourself today? All of the things. So it is okay, and it doesn't make you a bad parent. But I find that I have my moments too where imposter syndrome gets me as a parent, and I'm like, ooh, I don't think I'm being a good parent. I'm not being a good mom. I'm not doing the job correctly, because I do think of parenthood as a job, a natural job, of course, that you don't get paid for. But I think of it as a job, and the same way I view my professional job, I kind of view parenthood in that way too, where I have moments where I check in with myself and I don't feel like I'm doing very well, and I don't feel like I'm performing at my best. But I have to remind myself that my child is basically the product of my good parenting, of me being a good mother to her. And of course, I have friends around me, family around me, and things that uplift me and remind me of all the great things that I'm doing in her life. So that is very, very, very helpful. And of course, I'm going to say this to anyone out there. If you are also a parent and you have these moments, just know you're doing your damn thing. You're doing the damn thing. If you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're working, you're taking care of them, you're spending time with them, you're making sure they have everything that they need and more, you are being a good parent. Now, of course, there's areas in parenthood where we can kind of tune it up. Like, one of the things for me with my daughter is literally she wants me to keep my word. And I have issues with that sometimes because I overpromise her, and I mean well, but I know for a kid that's very disappointing. So I'm working on that. And she called it out to me, and I'm very happy that we have that relationship where she can kind of tell me where I'm falling short so that I can fix it and show up for her. I told her that thank you so much. I'm going to work on making sure I don't overpromise you. But as a result, that I'm not always going to have an answer for you right away. I might have to tell you, hey, let me think about that. Hey, let me get back with you. Hey, let me check my schedule and make sure that aligns with what I have. Or maybe I'll get back to you. So I had to also tell her that she has to be okay with that and not continue to ask me a million times. So that was a little tangent, but just to say that, yes, as parents, we also experience imposter syndrome, and that's also okay. You have to reassure yourself the same way you would professionally. I also wanted to share my next example of imposter syndrome in my life is starting this podcast. Now, I've been wanting to start this podcast, and don't laugh on the other end, but I've been wanting to start this podcast since 2022. 2023, I came up with all the ideas. I did not start the Moniece Hour until 2024, the end of it. And the first thing that came into my brain was, who's going to listen to it? How am I going to get people to listen to it? What if I'm not interesting enough? What if people are bored of me? How will people find me? How will I market this? I don't want to just make episodes and no one's listening to them. But guess what? When you feel something in your heart, when you feel like you're supposed to do something, you're supposed to do it. Don't think about the logistics. Get your stuff together and let's get it going. I also felt like, I wasn't interesting enough. I wasn't good enough to do a podcast. Who's going to listen to me? All of the things. So I was talking myself out of it. I had a lot of doubt. And finally, I'm like, I dream of sitting here and making episodes. I dream of it. It's a strong desire. I have everything that it takes. I'm an interesting person. I have good topics to talk about. And I know that I have a good message to give. So what's holding me back? Fear. That's it. I'm so happy I got over the imposter syndrome because I enjoy making these episodes. I enjoy sharing my experiences and also hoping that these experiences and these gems that I'm sharing is going to help someone else out there because it's rough out here. And also just creating a space where people have an outlet. I would love for people to write in and email me or message me and DM me on Instagram with stories or questions if they, need advice. I'm open to it and talking about it on the podcast. Absolutely. So I've also experienced imposter syndrome just by starting this. See, if I didn't get over my imposter syndrome, you would not have this episode. And lastly, I want to circle back around to imposter syndrome in tech, working in tech specifically. So I work in a male dominated space, and I find that especially my white male coworkers, they can really dominate the space and take over, and they make you feel like you're not smart enough or you're not good enough at your job. I know I feel like that all the time, but I'm also a woman, and then I'm a Black woman at that, so I really feel it. And it really gets to me sometimes, but it's a reminder that you are at that job for a reason. You're there for a reason. One thing that I try to keep in mind is that they wouldn't have hired me if I wasn't qualified to do the job. So whenever you feel like you're not good enough at work, wherever you are, just remember that people wouldn't have given you that opportunity if they didn't feel like you had the talent or skill set to follow through. Once you have that in your brain, it's very easy to realize that, yeah, no, I'm really that girl. I got this. I can do whatever I need to do. I have whatever it takes to climb to the next level, and I am doing a damn good job at my job. I think that's very important to remind ourselves that when we start to get in our heads, it's like they wouldn't have hired you if they didn't think you were good enough. So that should be enough to help fuel you to be the very best version of yourself. Now, as I was researching imposter syndrome, there were some really cool things that I kind of found out and I wanted to share with you guys. So, there are some myths about imposter syndrome, and I chose 3 of them that were pretty interesting to me that I wanted to touch on or discuss today. So, myth number 1 is that imposter syndrome is not real. Now, the reason why this is a myth is because imposter syndrome is absolutely real. Now, as I was doing research, I ran across an article on the Forbes website where they discussed myths of imposter syndrome. And one of the things it said about imposter syndrome not being real is that imposter syndrome has been extensively researched for the last 40 years across different environments, including academia, medicine, and the corporate world. So one thing that the scientists and researchers all agree on is that imposter syndrome is a real thing. And I absolutely feel that way as well. If so many people in the world are experiencing it, it's a real thing. It's not just in your head. And don't let anyone tell you it's just in your head. It's a real thing. But that's why reassurance, making that Google Docs that I discussed earlier that my manager recommended for me to do is going to be a great tool to use to remind you that you are qualified and to release the doubt that you might have about doing whatever it is you want to do, whether it's the workplace or whatever. So myth number 2 is imposter syndrome only affects women. Now, women are definitely the most common people to experience imposter syndrome, and I feel like the reason for that is just because we live in a male-dominated world, and women are constantly looked down upon, and we always have to work extra hard to prove that we deserve to be here, that we deserve the recognition that we should get. Women, we have to just work 10 times harder than our male counterparts. We have to prove that we are good enough. And you'll have situations where I see it all the time in the workplace where a woman on the team might mention something, and then the male coworker on the team might try to dominate the conversation and make it so that the woman feels like she doesn't know what she's talking about, just in the end for her to actually be right. So women, we have to work harder to prove ourselves, to even feel like we have a place to say something, especially in the workplace and corporate. And so I understand why women are the main group of people that experience imposter syndrome, but it doesn't just affect women. It also affects all people, all genders. So it's not just women. It's particularly prevalent among minority groups, including those who are marginalized because of race, ethnicity, or neurological differences. If you are a minority, you probably experience this more often than those that are a majority. And once again, I experience it all the time, and I am a Black woman in tech, but also in my company, there aren't any people that look like me, so I experience it a lot. Actually, recently though, I've noticed that I've been on my shit. I'm at work and I'm handling these tickets in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. while everybody is asleep. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just answered this ticket. I just sent this customer a long reply and I didn't need any help doing it. And then it's like reassurance to me, and I'm like, I'm gonna go ahead and tap myself on the shoulder because I did my thing. But if you suffer from imposter syndrome, like, I get it. It's rough. It's really rough. And it's not just in your head. So actually, I only came up with 2 myths that I wanted to share. I felt like those were the most interesting and the most common ones with imposter syndrome. Now, ways to overcome imposter syndrome, because we talked about what it looks like, how to deal with it, the myths, and all of the things. But I think overcoming it so that it doesn't affect you as much is going to be very important. So I did some research. I'm going to tell you what I have been doing to overcome imposter syndrome, and then I'm going to also give you some recommendations from my research. I think one of the main things, right, like the underlying thing that causes imposter syndrome is lack of confidence. And my manager and I used to talk about this all the time a few years back when I first started working at the company. But when you have lack of confidence, when you're not confident in who you are, that can also lead to feeling like you have imposter syndrome all the time. So it's important to do things to build your confidence. So for example, if you're in the workplace and there are certain topics or things that you know that is not your strong suit and you could probably study more to have better knowledge, then you should take time when you're not at work to build that skill, right? And if you are at work, doing more things to help build the skills so that you have more confidence in it. So whenever a situation arises, you're dealing with customers or whatever, your teammates, you're able to now take ownership and do the damn thing because you have built on that skill and now you're confident. You know what you're talking about. I noticed for myself, I experienced imposter syndrome the most when I didn't know much about a topic and I didn't know what I was talking about, because then I was like, why am I even working here? All my peers know what they're doing and I'm not. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not doing well. And so it would be this whole thing and I would just start spiraling. So one of the things that I did was I started to build on the skills. So like I told you guys, I am in tech. So I would spin up a test environment. I would go through old tickets of customers that were already worked and redo them without looking at the other replies from my teammates. And I would spin up a test environment so that I could strengthen my skill and understanding. And now there are certain things that I feel like I am an expert, quote unquote, at. I just have a better understanding. So I mentioned before that I am a database support engineer, but what I do is I basically help enterprise customers with database management, database optimization, database performance, all of the things, right? And so some of the main platforms that we deal with on the daily basis is Kubernetes and PostgreSQL, which is the database that we support, OpenShift, RHEL, and all of the others. And so Kubernetes was a scary thing for me when I first started at this job 2.5 years ago. But now it's something that I know very easily. I know how to spin up an environment in Kubernetes. I know how to use PG backups for backups, all the things. But I couldn't do that before. But now I'm so confident because I've done it so much. I've spun up test environments that I'm killing the shit. And now I can explain it to my coworkers. I can explain it to the customers, all the things. It's really important to build on the skill, and it will help build your confidence. In return, it'll help you overcome imposter syndrome because you know what you're talking about. Another thing that is scary, but I feel like it's important to do, is putting yourself out there, making yourself uncomfortable, but in the best way. This kind of goes hand in hand with the confidence things, but if there are things in your organization or just whatever you're doing, whether it's podcasting, starting your own business, whatever, if there's something that you're doing that you don't really understand or know, attend different events, attend different classes, workshops, whatever you need to do to gain more knowledge. And that might require you speaking to other people that you might not feel comfortable speaking with, etc. But I feel like the more you kind of expose yourself to the thing that you're afraid of, the better you'll feel later on down the line, because you'll have confidence, understanding, and it just helps. So that is going to be my suggestion and my advice for overcoming imposter syndrome, as well as reading some books. Some books that I really do like, and they don't really have anything to do with imposter syndrome, but it definitely has something to do with getting out of your brain. So The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is one of my favorite books of all time, because he really talks about just getting out of your head and not caring so much. And I think that book is helpful for all aspects of your life, including the workplace. And that will also, for me, it did help with my imposter syndrome. But some other books that I haven't read yet that are on my list of books to read that would be good for overcoming imposter syndrome is Get Out of Your Own Way by Mark Galston and The Imposter Phenomenon. I've heard great things about both of those two books, and those are on my list this year. So when I do read them, I'll definitely touch back on imposter syndrome again with my review of those two books. But for now, I'm just going to recommend them based off of reviews and my research, because from what I hear, it is a great book, and from people that are close to me that have also read those books as well. Another way to overcome imposter syndrome, besides reading, building up your confidence, and exposing yourself to more information, is to journal, and questions to ask yourself, right, in your journal. So I don't know about any of you, but I know I journal a lot. I get journal prompts, maybe from ChatGPT or from Google, and I'll sit down, I'll write the question, and then I'll really think about my answer and how I'm feeling about that. So some questions to ask yourself in a journal prompt when you're trying to get to the bottom of imposter syndrome so that you can truly overcome it. Question number 1, do you think you would be in the position that you're in right now if you weren't good enough or capable? Now that's also a question that my manager asked me. And I thought it was a great question, so I added it here. That question, put it in your journal prompt, put it in your notepad, or just ask yourself that question out loud and think about it. Think about your answer. That should also make you feel good. And maybe whenever you do feel like you're having imposter syndrome, besides the Google Docs that I told you about, maybe ask yourself that question every time. Validate yourself. Another thing to do is list 5 great things that you have done, whether it is in your role at a job, for your career, for your brand, etc. That will also help validate you. Validate who you are, validate how great you are, validate how good you're doing. That is a way to overcome imposter syndrome. I think that imposter syndrome really does stop us from reaching our fullest potential because we're so afraid and full of doubt. But the more that we carry this, the more that we're never going to get to where we need to go or challenge ourselves to reach for the stars. That's why a lot of people become complacent, because they have imposter syndrome. They want a new position at that job, but they don't feel like they're good enough to apply for that role. So they stay stuck in this role for 25 years, knowing that they wanted to do something else years ago, but they were too afraid. Imposter syndrome, overcoming it, is going to be extremely important to living a happy, healthy, and successful life. And I feel like you can't fully overcome it, but I do feel like you can train your mind so that when you have moments when you're doubting yourself, you can pull yourself out of it so quickly and carry on. Now, I do have some affirmations that you can speak and tell yourself in a mirror to help you overcome imposter syndrome in general, or just to validate yourself. Say it every day, because once you say it enough, you're going to believe it, subconsciously and consciously. So the first affirmation is, I am worthy and capable of doing the task that everyone else can do and more. I'll say it again. I am worthy and capable of doing the task that everyone else can do and more. Next affirmation, I have earned my seat at this table and I deserve to be here. I'll say it again. I have earned my seat at this table and I deserve to be here. Make sure you write that down. Write it in your journal, write it on a sticky note and put it on your mirror, write it on a sticky note and put it on your work desk. Wherever you need that reminder every day, put it somewhere where you can see it every day. Put it in your phone and the notes app. Put it in multiple places if you need to, so that you can really start to feel and believe and know that you are that girl, boy, or person in general. You're that person, okay? Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. As we finish up this episode today, I have some questions to ask you guys. Do you deal with imposter syndrome? If so, what are some ways that you cope with it when it arises? I would love for you guys to share your answers to that question if you want to. Feel free to send me a DM on the Monice Hour, or you can send an email to the monicehour@gmail.com with your answer to that question. Lastly, if you have any affirmations or any rituals you perform to overcome imposter syndrome, I would love for you to share it. And once again, you can share it at our Instagram account or even through email, whichever you want, or even on the comment section on one of the posts for the episode. Totally fine by me. I would love to hear from you guys, by the way. So if you do want to interact with me, please do. But anywho, I enjoyed talking about imposter syndrome today with you all. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, because imposter syndrome is really something that I struggle with. And I know people talk about it, but they don't talk about it enough in details of overcoming it, or even just sharing stories. I like to make these things relatable so people understand exactly what it is and how it affects people differently, and giving different scenarios. Until next time, I'll see you all on the next episode. If you aren't doing so already, please follow me on Instagram at the Monice Hour. Very soon, this podcast will have a YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch the videos while I record. And I might make art, I might draw. Drawing is making art. I might be doing whatever, but the whole point of this is just to feel like it's a conversation with you all, and you feel like you're having a conversation with me while I'm doing whatever I'm doing. Anywho, enough rambling. I'm out of here. Until next time.